Hopefully you can see them now. I'm very glad to be virtually in Ljubljana, although of course we're all contributing virtually. Anybody who wants to find me afterwards to pursue the conversation further, you can get me easily enough online. I am on Twitter at DW2. Futurists aren't just about making and discussing predictions. We're about making and discussing scenarios, convergences of more than one trend, which could or might not happen. And the point of looking at them is to decide, do we like them? Do we fear them? And what can we do now to change the probability of various scenarios happening? So I would like to look at a number of scenarios for the next few years, not about what the technology will do, but rather how society might respond to possibly a growing awareness and anticipation of the possibility of healthy super longevity. And I'm going to highlight 4 such scenarios and discuss what we can do about them. Indeed, I have 4 parts to my presentation. Briefly, I'll discuss what the public presently thinks about potential healthy super longevity. I'll ask the question, does it matter what the public thinks about this? Spoiler alert, yes, it matters a lot. It can make a big difference. Third, how might that viewpoint change in the years ahead? Possibly slowly, possibly quickly, and what influence might we exert so that the public will change its likely trajectory? To be clear what I'm talking about, sometimes people distinguish 5 different levels of healthy longevity advocacy. I'm going to look here at the first 3. Most discussion about healthy aging is about helping people to age in place better. The people still age, but they can have fuller lives due to mobility technology, communications technology, and a change of public attitude, an anti-ageism change. There are large activities in many parts of the world, including a big activity in the British Parliament called the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Longevity, and they are almost entirely focused on this level of healthy aging. What I would like, and I guess many others on this event, is to move more people to the second level, in which we are studying how super agers are different from the rest of us. Super agers are real people who live without having chronic diseases until much later in their lives. They can be 95 years or older, but still living the same as the average person does at 75 or 65. What's different about them in terms of genetics, epigenetics, diet, and so on, and how can we copy that more widely so that more people are super agers? That's the second level. A third level of the hierarchy is technology that could lead people to be forever young, in the sense that they could be much older, more older than the oldest person who has ever reliably been dated in their life. They could be 125 years or older and living in due course as healthily as the average 35-year-old today. This is the end of aging, the undoing of aging, the abolition of aging, alternative names for the same idea. So what I'm interested in is what's the public attitude towards the last of these scenarios, and also what is the likelihood of that changing. I think most people have got 2 viewpoints about potential healthy super longevity. They have mixed views. We are all to an extent schizophrenic about this. Most people would say, yes, I guess it would be quite nice to live longer. And actually, it would be good for the economy, at least in the short term, if people didn't get sick and didn't incur healthcare costs. On the other hand, the same people also tend to have in their minds views that it's probably an unrealistic fantasy. I did notice in the word cloud done during the break, somebody wrote down, is it possible? Many people will say it's an unrealistic fantasy. It's sort of evil. or immature to distract attention from other more practical problems. And people will also have at the back of their minds an uncomfortable feeling that although it might be good in the short term, if people were healthy for longer, there would be longer term, bigger, harder to quantify problems. Which of these views dominates? I was interested in the research highlighted at the beginning of this summit by Metka Kovacic, and she had some results on people favoring the left-hand side there. I questioned whether people had been given the chance to express more negative views. I do find that it's sometimes almost better not to ask the question. I find that when this subject is debated publicly, forcing a decision can sometimes lead people to become more opposed to healthy life extension, strangely, because they dislike giving any impression that they are personally selfish, and most people dislike publicly standing out from the crowd and taking what they perceive to be a minority point of view. There are other examples we could talk about of when posing a question like this has bad consequences, such as in the UK Brexit, which forced people to come down on one side or the other of whether they thought the EU was overly bureaucratic or was a good influence. But let's not say more about that. What I'm interested in, does it matter whether people spend more time thinking about these green possibilities or more time thinking about these red possibilities? Well, what people choose to study, what careers they take, is heavily influenced by these things. And it would be good for healthy longevity if more people decided to study this field. Whether people take time to become citizen scientists, either during slack time in their present occupation, or perhaps after they retire, or between activities. That's influenced again by what people think. The projects in which individuals invest not just their time, but their money is influenced by this viewpoint. And last but not least, what politicians do is influenced by what the public expresses in terms of their points of view. And I do want, as Didier was talking about earlier, I do want more public funding to go into long-term research into aging. And I also want the politicians to be quicker to address issues with regulations which are holding up some of the trials. So how might the public view change in the years ahead? It's possible that it will change slowly and then quickly. This is the path which many exponential trends follow. Sometimes people talk about a tipping point in between. Of course, it's possible there'll just be slow change and nothing will cause this tipping point. But I want to look ahead at some possibilities of internal dynamics causing an acceleration in the public mindset change, and also the possibilities of external shocks, which might cause changes. I'll refer to this diagram, which is possibly the most important diagram in the field of technology marketing. It comes from a book nearly 30 years old now, written by Geoffrey Moore, no relation of Gordon Moore. This is possibly an even more important Moore's Law. It reflects on the fact that people are spread out on a spectrum as regards their willingness to adopt a new product, the willingness to adopt an innovation. For example, the willingness of people to switch to an electric car, that varies on a spectrum. Some people are quick because they're interested in technology. Other people prefer to wait until they have almost no alternative. How quickly will people's attitudes change towards new ideas, such as Black Lives Matter, or that same-sex marriage should be supported? Geoffrey Moore's book says that naively we assume that once we start along this curve, once we start getting support from these early adopters, it'll be just an extension of that process before we gradually have everybody adopting the solution or the innovation. In reality, Many companies die in what Geoffrey Moore calls a chasm. Most startups fail in around this point, sometimes called the valley of death. It's because there are fundamental changes in the psychology and in the attitudes of people in the different sides of that chasm. To start off with, customers or individuals are interested in raw technology, radical new ideas for their own sake, whereas the majority are much more interested in seeing practical, proven examples which they believe they can trust and which will have no adverse side effects. People on the left are able to put up with poor usability. They don't mind debugging problematic software. They don't mind spending time consulting user manuals or being on the phone to IT departments. People on the right won't accept poor usability. People on the left don't mind standing out from the crowd, walking a solitary path. People on the mainstream here require products or ideas to have social validation. These people look around at their friends, they look at people like them as they see it to see whether they have a similar view or not. Because of this change in attitude, as I said, changes often happen slower than people would imagine, even though there's an initial flurry of excitement. It's until that chasm is crossed with targeted, carefully chosen products. And once you get into the mainstream, things can go faster again. So what are the possible scenarios for the next 5 years? I'm going to list and describe 4. There's inertia prevails. In other words, not much change. People, on the whole, don't express strong views either way about this subject, and there's little change in attitude. The second scenario, harden, is about people deciding this is a bad idea, and there is growing disbelief in the possibility and attractiveness of healthy super longevity. A third scenario is sort of the opposite of the second. This is when interest surges and a growing understanding for what's involved and enthusiasm for what's involved. The fourth scenario is a combination of the second and third, with growing conflict, with bitter rivalries dominating, with greater partisanship, an extension of something we're already seeing in the world with more tribal rivalries than before. So what might cause these various scenarios to take life? What might cause growing disbelief and opposition to healthy super longevity? I'm going to list 6 things, and if we have time, we can go into them in more detail. There could be an upset in trials, which have been publicly spoken about, and it turns out they don't work. There could be a view that healthy longevity supporters are just overhyping some poorly understood science. They haven't grasped the full complexity. And so there is a reaction against overhyping. The community that presently supports healthy longevity might start pointing fingers of accusation at each other. The community could schism. Prominent backers could reverse their current position of support for this point of view. And there could be different changes now, different trends. There could be a resurgence of what we might call natural ideologies, ideologies that say natural limits are good. It's bad to try and tempt nature by living longer, and we should no longer try to play God to such an extent. There's also the possibility of another trend growing, which is the backlash against elites, backlash against so-called experts, the view that there's too much inequality in the world. This is manifest in the revolt against the so-called 1%. It's increasingly now manifest in the last few days in a reaction against authority figures and police forces around the world, with the great new interest in Black Lives Matter. If we are not careful, this possibility of healthy longevity might be perceived as only available for elites, and there would be a backlash against it. Can we counter these possible developments? Well, yes, we can. and I'd like to say more about this too. We should avoid dangerous trials, avoid giving too much hype to them. Instead, we should look at the truly successful trials and ensure they get lots of public attention. We should follow a cardinal rule of technology marketing, which is under promise and then over deliver. If you over promise, you may get short-term interest. That is often a prelude to a fall. We need to manage diversity within our community. There are many people in our community who have different viewpoints and different attitudes, different motivations. I'll say something about how we should be able to manage that diversity productively. We can get new prominent backers. We should be engaging and winning the battle of ideas. And very importantly, we should constantly be pointing out the ways in which these therapies will not necessarily be restricted to just a few, but can benefit everyone. So if we do the things that I've highlighted there in green backing, there's a possibility that interest will surge, slowly at first, and then with tipping points more quickly, just as attitudes towards same-sex marriage went slowly for a long time before quickly. And regarding Black Lives Matters, just in the last few days, more people are reporting themselves positive to that sentiment. There's a bigger increment in that than has taken place in the 25 years previously. Slow change followed by a quick change. It also needs to be a sound change so that the change in position is maintained. I think I've got a few minutes to dive into some of these in more detail. What trials should we be highlighting? For a long time, the wisdom was that we should highlight trials in which middle-aged mice could receive treatments and rejuvenated them. Indeed, this was the logic behind the Methuselah Mouse Prize. Well, this hasn't quite worked, has it? Because we have managed to rejuvenate middle-aged mice by an extent, not to keep them living indefinitely, but we have extended their lifespan 20 or 30%, and it hasn't quite taken the public view yet. And I guess it's because many people shrug their shoulders and say mice and humans are just too different, despite having some commonalities. After all, many cancer treatments that first show signs in mice don't extend to humans. I think we need to find some middle point of view. I am looking to the trials of reduced-age dogs, which I think has the promise and potential to work. Trials being developed by George Church, Matt Kaeberlein, and others. People love their dogs in a way they don't quite love mice. And if their favorite dogs are slowing down and then are speeded up again with a new spring in their tail due to treatments of rapamycin or rapalogs, that can have a big difference. These are the kind of trials that could change public opinion quite considerably in the next few years. I applaud what's being done by the Forever Healthy Institute, headed by Michael Graver, with its publication of very thoughtful, balanced, non-commercially motivated assessments of trials in humans. This, I think, is the gold standard now, and we should point more people towards that. I also think we should point more people towards the rejuvenation roadmap of solutions curated by the Lifespan.io community. That's great too. And we should look forward to more reports in Nature, such as appeared just a few months ago, the report of work done by Greg Fahey, which actually was highlighted in Nature, none other as first hint that body's biological age can be reversed by improving the immune system, it turns out. So let's look forward to more of that. In terms of overpromising, in terms of avoiding overpromising, I think we need to be more internally self-critical. We need to apply a technique from the world of commerce, also the world of politics, called adversarial red teaming, in which friends of the movement start to debug the different points of view and try to poke holes in it to avoid examples subsequently falling apart under scrutiny and delivering lots of bad examples. As well as avoiding the bad examples, we should ensure the best examples are well known, and we should be sure that people understand that even the best promising treatments still have probabilities attached. This is one learning from discussions of the COVID crisis. That people need to understand statistics and probability more fully. We should talk about the trials of Matt Caberline in terms of dogs and say, well, it's only a certain probability it's going to work, and here are the factors which can influence outcomes. In this way, we can raise the caliber of that discussion. So we can also enable portfolio investing, which has been done very promisingly by Jim Mellon's Juvenescence Fund. He is quite candid that most investments in these speculative treatments probably won't work. But he is saying if we talk about it probabilistically, if we provide vehicles to encourage investing in portfolios, baskets of different treatments, they are more likely to be successful. To summarize what I've just said, message management is important. In some ways, almost important as the technology and the therapies. We need to invest time on that, ensuring we get it right. And community management is important too. And possibly this is where my talk may get a little bit more controversial. We have to anticipate possible bad adverse reactions if we fail to anticipate and manage the relations between different people in this wider community. We don't want a too many cooks spoiling the broth scenario. We don't want to deter potential important allies because they look at some of the friends of the community and roll their eyes and say, this is bad science, this is incredible, this is irresponsible. Instead, we need to ensure we get a synergy out of this community. 1 + 1 = 3 or more. But we do have to realize there is diversity in this community, and we have to manage that community's diversity in a positive and proactive way. So we can look not just at the first 3 levels of this hierarchy I mentioned before, we can also introduce 2 more possible levels who are certainly parts of the wider community. So I'm no doubt that most of us on this call want to make that first migration. People looking at healthy aging should also look at the possibilities of more people being super agers. Most people on the call will agree we should be raising people's awareness about the possibility of the abolition of aging forever young. But when we talk about transhumanism or immortality, things get more controversial. Well, I think we do need to face up to that T word, transhumanism. I think in the coming few years, more and more people around the world are going to look at the growth in technology and realize that traditional moral frameworks, such as humanism, are insufficient to guide us in how to deal with the possibilities technology is providing. Humanism, a quick definition, it says we can't just trust what holy books say, we can't just trust what nature seems to imply, we have to use the best of human insight, guided by experience, guided by reflection, guided by education to take decisions. And in this process, we shouldn't put too much faith in any one authority, and we shouldn't place nature on a pedestal. So I support all of that as a humanist. But transhumanists want to say more, which is one reason why transhumanism is sometimes called humanism ++, or the symbol H+ is used. We say all of that, but also the human species in its current form does not represent the end of our development, but rather a comparatively early phase. So we should not put undue priority on protecting all aspects of today's human nature. Instead, we should insist that with wisdom, and yes, with a lot of care, we can do a lot better. Not just in terms of longer lives, healthy lives, the first super of transhumanism, the super that says we can transcend the inherited limits and weaknesses towards physical decay and decrepitude, More and more people are realizing the possibility of super intelligence, in which we find ways to transcend another set of inherited weaknesses, our mental blind spots, our cognitive biases, if you like, our collective stupidity. So we fix the problem that we are a smart but stupid species. People are also increasingly thinking in these times of a COVID crisis, they are more aware of the growing pandemic of mental ill health. They're more aware that as people are locked up in uncertain times, forced to spend more time than they want with family members, unsure of the future financial well-being, there is a growth in unwellness mentally. But transhumanism talks in its third super about super happiness, super well-being. And some transhumanists, the technoprogressives at least, talk also about transcending human tendencies towards tribalism, xenophobia, divisiveness, deception, and abuse of power. So I think this discussion is bound to grow in the years ahead. I also think that the humanist defense of longer lives won't sustain itself, and we need to go beyond it. So just to finish, I want to spend a couple of minutes looking at clarifying the benefits to everyone. It's already been mentioned by a couple of speakers, the idea of the longevity dividend, which came out about, 15 years ago in a book edited by a number of highly respected long-time gerontologists, Jay Olshansky, George Martin, and James Kirkland. They have economic arguments there as to why it is actually good for the economy for us to invest in healthy longevity. The idea hasn't gone very far. Few people talk about the longevity dividend for a number of reasons. First, people didn't take seriously the probability that we could extend healthy longevity by much. As that calculation changes, more people will look at this. Also, it was quite an expensive book, as it happens. Also, I think we need to take the ideas in that further. So we have to go beyond just saying we should adjust the pension schemes. People are terribly afraid of more people living longer. They say, what's going to happen to the pension funds? It's political dynamite to try and raise pension age. We have to argue not just that super agers will draw down less healthcare budgets because they will be healthier for longer. We have to extend the argument, point out that because of automation, because of the improvements in the fourth industrial revolution, all kinds of costs will come down. So we won't need so much money to live good quality of life. That's part of the answer. The other part of the answer is, rather than abolishing the pension or making the pension only available for older people, I actually foresee the opposite. And we'll have something like a universal basic income paid to everybody. It won't need to be large because the costs of a good life will be small, but it will leave plenty for everyone. Adverse social impact, I don't really have too much time to discuss that. I think the worries that people have about issues in terms of a lack of ability to be promoted in jobs if old people stay in place for longer, I think there are good answers to that. In terms of impact on the environment, people are worried that as the population gets larger and more people use more energy, things that technology increases, is going to be very bad for the environment. But part of the extended argument for a new longevity dividend is to point out that more technology decreases the carbon intensity of energy usage and improves the recycling effectiveness. So the same technology and scientific improvements that will give us biotech rejuvenation will also give us clean meat, better ways to create agriculture. It will give us, if we push for it hard enough, more green energy, negative emissions technology, and so forth. And in terms of adverse philosophical impact, I think we have good arguments and answers there too. So I'll conclude there. I think we can see faster change than people generally expect. If we manage our messages, if we highlight the right trials, if we manage the community and we win the arguments, if we revive the longevity dividend and improve it, we can see a growing surge of interest sooner than most people expect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David Wood, for this fantastic presentation. It was really interesting from the point of view of people who wish to develop this society, this community, and to push these ideas forward. And now we have some time for questions. Just a second that I open it, the chat. So first from Tom Primožić. Thanks, David. I think the social aspects of technology and future trends are often overvaluated. Really good analysis. And
so in writing my own book, The Abolition of Aging, I went through some of the familiar arguments in the first few chapters, but the more I wrote, the more I thought the social arguments developed more study. In the very last chapter of this book, I start listing what can go wrong, and a view is that most of the things that could go wrong are social and political problems, which is why the next book I wrote, by the way, is about transcending politics and why we need better politics to ensure that we really do get the benefits that technology is putting within our grasp. So yeah, I'm happy to have longer discussions of the social consequences and how to ensure that everybody benefits and make it clear to everybody that there will be wide benefits from these healthy longevity.